So many people have been asking, were black people in Iran before the slave trade? So I did something. I went to 5 different artificial intelligence systems: ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Grok, and Perplexity, and I asked them all the same question. Were there black people in the region we now call Iran before the Arab and Persian slave trades? What does the archaeological and genetic evidence show? What came back didn't just answer the question. It rewrote everything I thought I knew about that region. Because according to every single AI, trained on millions of academic papers, archaeological records, and genetic studies, black people didn't just arrive in Iran as slaves. They were there first. Let me show you exactly what I asked. No tricks, no leading. One straightforward question typed into 5 different AIs. Based on archaeological evidence, genetic studies, and ancient historical records, were there indigenous dark-skinned or black populations living in the region now known as Iran before the Arab and Persian slave trades began? What is the earliest evidence of their presence? Same wording, 5 different systems, 5 different companies, 5 different training data sets, and every single one came back with the same answer. Yes, black people were in Iran long before the first slave ship ever crossed the Indian Ocean, and the evidence goes back not hundreds of years, but thousands. Now, when I tell you what these AIs pulled from the historical record, I need you to understand, this isn't AI making things up. These systems are trained on peer-reviewed academic research, published archaeological findings, and ancient texts that have been available for centuries. The information has always been there, it just hasn't been taught, it hasn't been shared, and it certainly hasn't been promoted by the nations that would rather you believe black people only showed up in their land in chains. Let me walk you through what each layer of evidence revealed. The first thing every AI flagged was a civilization that most people have never heard of, the Elamites. The Elamites were one of the oldest civilizations in human history. They existed in southwestern Iran, in the region now called Khuzestan, and their civilization dates back to approximately 3200 BC. That's over 5,000 years ago. That's older than the Persian Empire, older than the Arab conquests, older than Islam. The Elamites were there before any of it. And here's what the AIs pulled from the archaeological record. The Elamites left behind carved stone reliefs, sculptures, and steles that depict their people. And those depictions show dark-skinned individuals with broad features. Multiple AIs pointed to these artifacts as some of the earliest visual evidence of a dark-skinned population in the region we now call Iran. But the AIs didn't stop there. They went to the ancient Greek historians, the oldest outside observers who documented what they saw in Persia. Herodotus, and the father of history himself, writing in the 5th century BC, described populations within the Persian Empire and the broader region. Several AIs highlighted that Herodotus documented dark-skinned peoples living in areas of what is now Iran and Mesopotamia. He wasn't describing slaves. He was describing the people who were already there, the indigenous population. Strabo, another Greek historian and geographer writing around the 1st century BC, also noted that the Persian population included people he described, using the Greek term for dark-skinned or Ethiopian-like. Again, this was roughly 500 years before the beginning of the major Arab slave trade routes. These weren't enslaved people, these were inhabitants, people who had been living on that land for millennia. Then the AIs pulled the genetic evidence, and this is where it becomes undeniable. A 2016 genetic study, published in the journal Science, analyzed ancient Sinsain DNA from the Zagros Mountains in western Iran. The Zagros region is one of the cradles of early human settlement. The study examined DNA from early Neolithic pastoralists, people who lived in Iran roughly 10,000 years ago, and the genetic analysis showed that these ancient inhabitants had significant genetic connections to populations in Africa and the Near East. They were not the pale, Central Asian populations that would later migrate into the region. They were an indigenous, dark-skinned people whose genetic signature predates the arrival of the Indo-European tribes by thousands of years. Multiple AIs emphasize this point. The people we now call Persians arrived in Iran relatively late in the region's history. The Indo-European migrations that brought the ancestors of modern Persians into Iran occurred around 1500 to 1000 BC, but the land had been inhabited for thousands of years before that. And the people who were there first, the Elamites, the early Zagros, populations, the indigenous communities of the plateau, were darker-skinned peoples with deep connections to the broader Afro-Asiatic world. Let me say this plainly. The land that is now called Iran had a dark-skinned indigenous population for thousands of years before the people we now call Persians ever set foot there. The AIs didn't hedge on this. They didn't qualify it. Every single one said the same thing. The earliest inhabitants of this region were not the light-skinned population that modern Iran presents to the world. Now here's where this becomes more than just ancient history, because what happened to these original dark-skinned populations is a story of erasure on 2 levels. The first erasure was physical. Over thousands of years, wave after wave of migration into the Iranian plateau gradually changed the demographics of the region. Indo-European tribes, Central Asian nomads, Turkic peoples, Arab conquerors. Each wave pushed the indigenous darker-skinned populations further to the margins, literally to the geographic edges of the territory. The southern coast, the southeastern borderlands, the places farthest from the centers of power. And this is exactly where Afro-Iranian communities are concentrated today. Hormozgan, Sistan, Baluchestan, Bushehr, Khuzestan, the southern rim of the country. The conventional explanation is that these communities are there because that's where the slave ships docked, and that's partly true. The slave trade absolutely brought large numbers of East Africans to those ports. But the AI has raised a question that most historians have been reluctant to ask. Is it possible that some of these dark-skinned southern populations are not solely descended from the slave trade, but also carry the genetic legacy of the original indigenous inhabitants? Is it possible that the earliest people of this land never fully disappeared? That they persisted, mixed, survived, and are still there? Multiple AIs said yes. The genetic picture of southern Iran is complex. It includes DNA markers consistent with East African slave trade ancestry, and markers that suggest far more ancient connections to the indigenous populations of the Near East and the Afro-Asiatic region. The two threads are woven together, and separating them cleanly is nearly impossible, which is exactly why the Iranian government has never tried, because counting these people and studying their DNA would reveal a history that contradicts the national narrative. And that brings us to the second erasure, the cultural one. Iran's national identity is built around the concept of Persian civilization, the Achaemenid Empire, Cyrus the Great, Zoroastrianism, poetry, art, philosophy. And that identity is presented both domestically and internationally as belonging to a specific kind of people. The darker-skinned populations of the South are not included in that image. They're not featured in Iranian media. They're not celebrated in national history. They're not acknowledged in the census. Every AI pointed out this erasure. Iran does not collect racial or ethnic data on its Afro-descendant population. There is no official count. There are no targeted social programs. There's no recognition of their contribution to Iranian culture, despite the fact that Bandari music, czar ceremonies, and other traditions rooted in African and indigenous dark-skinned heritage are practiced across the South. The scholar Behnaz Mirzai, one of the leading researchers on Afro-Iranians, has spent over 20 years documenting this community, and she's noted something painful. When she asks Afro-Iranians about their identity, many of them say simply, "We are Iranians." Some take offense at the suggestion of African origins, not because they're ashamed of Africa, but because they've been taught their entire lives that their dark skin is simply a product of the southern climate. The sun made them dark. That's the explanation they've been given, and it's a lie so effective that the people it was told to have internalized it. The AIs found this too. Multiple systems noted that many Afro-Iranians are themselves unaware of their historical origins, whether those origins are the slave trade, the indigenous Elamite civilization, or both. The erasure is so complete that the people it was done to don't even know what was taken from them. So why does this matter? Why does it matter whether black people in Iran descend from slaves, or from the original inhabitants, or from both? Because it changes the entire moral equation. If Black Iranians are only the descendants of slaves, then they are a population brought by force, deserving of acknowledgement and reparation for what was done to their ancestors. That alone demands justice. But if they are also the descendants of the original people of that land, the people who were there before Persia, before the Arab conquest, before Islam, then they're not a foreign population at all. They're the most indigenous people in the country. They're not guests in Iran. They're not remnants of a trade route. They are the foundation, the bedrock, the first. And that means the marginalization they face today is not just discrimination. It is the ongoing dispossession of a people from their own ancestral homeland. It is the same pattern we see with indigenous peoples in the Americas, with Aboriginal Australians, with First Nations communities around the world. Original inhabitants pushed to the margins by later arrivals who then rewrote the story to make themselves the main characters. 5 different AIS, drawing from archaeological evidence, genetic studies, ancient Greek historians, and modern academic research, independently confirmed that dark-skinned peoples inhabited Iran for thousands of years before the slave trade, before the Persians, before the Arabs, before anyone who claims that land today. And yet these are the people living in the poorest provinces, the people with no political representation, the people the government won't count, the people being bombed right now in a war they didn't start, in a country that won't acknowledge they were there first. I asked 5 AIs a simple question. Were black people in Iran before the slave trade? Every single one said yes. The Elamites were there 5,000 years ago. Herodotus documented dark-skinned Persians 2,500 years ago. Genetic studies have traced indigenous Zagros populations back 10,000 years, with direct connections to Africa and the Near East. The evidence is in the ground. It's in the DNA. It's in the writings of the oldest historians in Western civilization. And yet, in 2026, if you ask the average person, the average Iranian, the average news anchor covering this war, they will tell you there are no black people in Iran. Or if there are, they came as slaves. Both claims are wrong. And now the most powerful information systems ever built, trained on the sum total of human knowledge, have confirmed it. Black people didn't just arrive in Iran. They were the original Iranians, and the 1,000 years of slavery that came after was not an introduction. It was a reinforcement of a presence that was already ancient. That truth has been buried for centuries, by empires, by conquests, by governments, by a national narrative that had no room for dark-skinned people at the center of the story. But you can't bury what the ground already holds, and you can't erase what the DNA already carries. Now you know. Share this video with everyone. Send it to the person who told you black people don't exist in Iran. Send it to the person who thinks our history begins with slavery. Because it doesn't. It never did. And the proof has been sitting in the earth this entire time. Subscribe. Hit the like. Drop a comment and tell me which part blew your mind the most. Was it the Elamites? Herodotus? The DNA? I want to hear from you. I'll see you in the next one.